Hey Guy, tonight we're going to step quietly into a foggy, sprawling English estate. Imagine yourself shuffling along ancient stone pathways slick with mist, the moon a pale smudge behind drifting clouds. Somewhere nearby, the rustling of leaves and a distant owl call tangle with the faint echo of footsteps that might or might not be human. You probably wouldn't survive a night here back in the day, not without a cloak, a lantern, and nerves of steel. This was a place where British nobles loved to throw a little mischief into their grand parties by hiring fake ghosts to haunt their guests. Yes, you heard right, ghosts for hire. So before you lie back comfortably, remember to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy what I do here. And if you're already curled up in your cozy corner of the world, drop your location and local time below. I'm curious if you're joining from a quiet countryside or a bustling city. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on a gentle fan behind you, and let's slowly step into tonight's journey together. It's one where nobles once held lavish parties filled with music, laughter, and whispered rumors. But hidden in the shadows of these gatherings was a peculiar pastime, scaring guests with ghostly apparitions, so convincing some ran screaming into the night. Remember the sunscreen made from crocodile dung? Well, this was no less strange, a practice, and historians still argue about how much of these hauntings were elaborate pranks or something a bit more superstitious. Servants would rig pulleys to swing chandeliers. Nobles would dress in white sheets with painted faces, and strange contraptions produced eerie sounds that echoed through dark corridors. The goal was not just to frighten, but to show who held the power over the night and the stories told in it. As you imagine the flickering candlelight and the soft rustle of silk gowns disturbed by sudden chills, think about the thrill of being caught between belief and mockery. This was a time when the line between reality and fantasy was deliciously blurred. Ghost stories were not only entertainment, but also a social game where cunning hosts demonstrated their cleverness. And so the night's eerie play began under the watchful eyes of portraits long since faded, but still seeming to follow your every move. The fascination with ghost stories didn't appear out of thin air. You find yourself wandering through the fog of history to the 1600s and 1700s, when British aristocrats first turned ghost tales into a fashionable pastime. Imagine candlelit drawing rooms where powdered wigs gleam and the crackle of fireplace logs competes with hushed whispers about restless spirits. These stories were as much about bonding and social standing as about the supernatural. Nobles would gather after dinner to share chilling accounts that blended folklore, family secrets, and just a hint of exaggeration. Remember that sunscreen made from crocodile dung? Well, back then, mixing fact with fanciful tales was almost an art form. Ghost stories became part of elite social rituals, a way to entertain guests while subtly showing off education and wit. Some nobles were collectors of ghost legends, eager to trace the origins of every haunted portrait or cursed artifact in their vast collections. Historians still argue that this obsession with ghosts was a coping mechanism for an era marked by political upheaval and shifting power structures. Perhaps the ghosts were metaphors for fears that no one dared to speak aloud. You can almost hear the soft rustle of silk gowns and the clinking of crystal as a noble recounts a tale about the gray lady who haunts a nearby abbey, her mournful cries echoing through the ruins. It wasn't just about scaring guests, it was about weaving a tapestry of mystique around one's family and estate. Ghost stories added layers of prestige and intrigue like badges worn proudly at these exclusive gatherings, and sometimes the stories got so good that they inspired real-life hauntings, with nobles hiring actors and setting up elaborate tricks to bring their tales to life. Those early ghost tales were a strange cocktail of superstition, history, and theatricality. And this mixture would soon inspire a new kind of entertainment, one where ghosts weren't just stories, but actors in a ghostly performance designed to dazzle and terrify. So the rise of ghost stories in aristocratic circles wasn't just about fear, but about control storytelling and the complicated dance of power behind closed doors. You're now beginning to see why scaring guests was more than just a bit of fun, it was a statement. Picture yourself stepping into a grand ballroom filled with the glint of chandeliers and the murmur of aristocrats trading sharp smiles and sharper gossip. In this world, making someone jump wasn't just a prank. It was a way to show you had the means, the creativity, and the social edge to orchestrate something unforgettable. Frightening visitors with fake ghosts became a status symbol, a curious badge of honor that only the cleverest nobles could pull off. Remember the sunscreen made from crocodile dung? Well, think of this as another bizarre form of prestige. It wasn't enough to host a party or own a massive estate. You had to turn it into an experience. Homes into theatrical stages where illusions played on the fears and imaginations of their guests. Historians still argue that these haunted entertainments blurred the line between cruelty and amusement. Some say it was all in good fun, while others believe it was a subtle form of social control, reminding guests who really held the power under that opulent roof. Imagine guests arriving with their finest clothes and a cocktail of anticipation and nervous laughter, only to be greeted by sudden cold drafts, flickering shadows, or soft ghostly moans drifting through corridors. It wasn't just about the scare itself, but the thrill, the shared secret of having been part of an elaborate ruse. In a society obsessed with appearances and etiquette, the ability to surprise and unsettle was a way to command respect, or at least awe. Strangely enough, these ghostly displays were also a way to break the stiff formality of noble gatherings. They injected a touch of chaos into an otherwise highly controlled environment, letting people experience fear in a safe, controlled way. The fact that the scares were fake made them all the more thrilling. After all, nothing says high society like having the power to play with reality and then calmly enjoy the aftermath over brandy and conversation. So next time you think of ghosts as spooky tales told around a campfire, remember that for British nobles, scaring guests was a sophisticated game, part performance, part social commentary, and all about keeping their guests on their toes. You slip deeper into the shadowed halls of these grand estates and discover the early methods nobles used to invent their fake ghosts. It wasn't just about donning a white sheet and moaning in a spooky voice. No, these were clever devices and theatrical tricks designed to fool even the most skeptical guest. Imagine pulleys hidden in the rafters, swinging chandeliers back and forth, or thin wires that made paintings seem to shift and stare. These mechanical wonders were the special effects of their day. Remember the sunscreen made from crocodile dung? Well, these ghost tricks might sound just as strange now, but back then they were cutting edge. Nobles experimented with smoke machines created from smoldering herbs and concealed bells that rang with no visible source. Some went further, hiring actors to dress in eerie costumes complete with pale faces and glowing eyes. The performance was rehearsed carefully to maximize surprise and the illusion of something unearthly walking those long hallways. Historians still argue how sophisticated these devices really were because many accounts come from diaries or letters where exaggeration is likely. But one thing is clear, nobles invested considerable resources into making their ghostly pranks believable. These hauntings were not random scares, but carefully crafted spectacles that blended craftsmanship with a flair for drama. Some estates even had secret passages used exclusively by these ghostly performers to appear and vanish mysteriously. You can almost hear the creak of wood as a hidden door opens just enough to reveal a ghostly figure floating silently past. The servants were often in on the secret, helping to operate these tricks, sometimes balancing their fear of being caught with the thrill of participating in such a strange charade. And so the fake ghost evolved from simple scare tactics to full-blown theatrical productions designed to dazzle and terrify. So next time you think of ghosts as spooky stories, remember that for British nobles, these phantoms were carefully engineered illusions created with ingenuity and a touch of madness. You begin to realize that these ghostly performances were more than just clever tricks. They were a way to shape the atmosphere of a party and control how guests felt. Imagine yourself standing in a dimly lit hallway, the flicker of candlelight casting long shadows on the walls. Suddenly, a cold breeze brushes your neck, and you catch the soft sound of a whisper just beyond hearing. The nerves tighten and your heart skips a beat, but then you remember the elaborate setup and wonder if it's real or staged. This is exactly the mix of fear and fascination nobles aimed to create. Remember the sunscreen made from crocodile dung? Well, this art of teasing the senses was no less bizarre. The nobles used every tool available to heighten tension, from carefully timed sounds of chains rattling to ghostly figures that vanished when approached. Some even employed scent, burning herbs to create an eerie, smoky smell that filled the air and made the scene more believable. Historians still argue about how much guests actually believed in these phantoms versus enjoying the thrill of the spectacle. But whether genuine fear or clever amusement, the effect was undeniable. What makes this even stranger is the willingness of nobles to keep pushing the envelope. Some hosted entire evenings dedicated to ghostly experiences, with guests invited to explore haunted rooms filled with props and actors. These events mix entertainment with subtle lessons in courage and social hierarchy. After all, enduring the fright without panic was a mark of breeding and composure. The scares became a game where guests tested their nerves and hosts displayed their creativity and resources. The strange combination of fear control and entertainment shows how deeply ghosts permeated aristocratic culture. Far from just stories to tell by the fire, these fake hauntings were performances that played on human psychology and social dynamics. They remind us that sometimes fear is not just something to avoid, but a feeling to explore and even celebrate. You start to notice that these ghostly spectacles weren't always about fun and games. Sometimes they carried a sharper edge, used to send messages, intimidate rivals, or even protect secrets. Picture a shadowy library where a whispered warning seems to float from the walls, or a forbidden chamber where a ghostly figure guards a hidden passage. Nobles were masters of psychological theater, using their ghostly illusions not just to entertain, but to manipulate. Remember the sunscreen made from crocodile dung? Well, using ghosts as tools of intimidation might seem just as odd. Some aristocrats hired ghost actors to scare away unwanted visitors or to create legends that would keep curious neighbors at bay. These fake hauntings could reinforce family legends, protect valuable assets, or discourage prying eyes. Historians still argue how often these scare tactics truly worked versus becoming harmless tales passed down through generations. But the strategic use of fear was clearly part of the noble playbook. Imagine the nervous footstep of a rival retreating hastily after a ghostly apparition appeared in their path. Such moments blurred the lines between superstition and power plays. Nobles wielded fear like a weapon, turning their grand estates into psychological fortresses. And in an age before modern security systems, a well-timed ghost could be surprisingly effective. It's strange to think that what seems like childish fun today was once a serious tool for control and influence. These fake ghosts were more than spirits. They were carefully crafted symbols of authority, mystery, and sometimes warning. So as you relax now, remember how deep the history of ghosts runs beneath the velvet curtains of aristocratic life. You begin to understand how these ghostly antics shaped the social fabric of British nobility. Imagine yourself sitting quietly in a vast drawing room where the flicker of candlelight casts dancing shadows on the tapestry-covered walls. The conversation is lively yet tinged with an undercurrent of suspense because everyone knows that tonight the ghosts might come out to play. These spectral performances became a kind of secret language among the elite, a way to test loyalties and nerves without saying a word. Remember the sunscreen made from crocodile dung? It's odd how seemingly unrelated oddities tie into the strange customs of the past. Nobles who hosted these ghostly entertainments were often seen as witty and daring, the kind of people who could orchestrate both elegance and eerie thrills. Historians still debate whether guests genuinely believed in the hauntings or if it was all a sophisticated, shared joke. Some argue that the ghosts helped break the ice in stiff social gatherings, providing a harmless way to inject excitement and mystery. Picture the subtle glances exchanged when a ghostly figure suddenly appears and vanishes just out of reach. Guests' reactions were as much a part of the spectacle as the phantoms themselves. Enduring these spooky moments without showing fear became a mark of composure and breeding. It was a social game wrapped in mist and mystery. Oddly enough, these ghostly encounters also served as a distraction from more serious matters: political tensions, family rivalries, and the pressures of maintaining status. The fake ghosts gave everyone a shared experience that could temporarily unite or divide. In a world ruled by etiquette and hierarchy, such moments of unpredictability were rare and therefore prized. So as you listen now, imagine the thrill of being part of a noble gathering where the line between reality and illusion is as thin as the flickering candle flame. You can almost feel the chill creeping along the stone corridors as the elaborate ghost shows evolve. These performances become increasingly sophisticated and elaborate, with nobles competing to outdo one another in terrifying creativity. Picture a secret chamber where glowing eyes peer from dark corners or a hidden organ suddenly plays a haunting melody that fills the entire hall. It's no longer just about simple scares. These events turn into full theatrical productions, mixing mystery, music, and illusion. Remember the sunscreen made from crocodile dung? It sounds odd, but this era was filled with strange mixtures of science and superstition. Nobles experimented with early technologies and chemical concoctions to create eerie effects like flickering lights or phantom scents that lingered long after the performance ended. Historians still debate how much these innovations were inspired by genuine curiosity versus the desire to impress and intimidate. One thing is clear: the spirit of invention fueled these ghostly displays. Imagine the thrill of walking through a manor where shadows move unpredictably and whispers echo from nowhere. The boundaries between reality and fantasy blur, making guests question their senses. The noble's obsession with these haunting spectacles reveals how deeply fear and fascination intertwine. For all their opulence and control, they still sought moments of unpredictability to shake their world. It's strange to think that the echoes of these performances ripple into today's haunted house attractions and horror films. The fake ghosts of British nobility were early pioneers of immersive entertainment that plays on primal fears while offering a safe escape. As you settle in now, you become part of that long tradition of thrill seekers and storytellers. You find yourself wandering deeper into the maze of history, where the line between reality and myth grows ever thinner. The fake ghosts begin to acquire legends of their own, stories whispered in hushed tones long after the performances end. Imagine a noble estate where a particular ghost appears so frequently and with such eerie detail that it takes on a life beyond its theatrical origins. Guests start arriving already half convinced by the stories, primed to be terrified. Remember the sunscreen made from crocodile dung? Odd little facts like that remind you how strange and unpredictable history can be. These ghosts, initially contrived, grew into symbols entwined with the identity of families and places. Historians still debate how much the nobility believed in their own creations or whether they fully understood the power these stories had over their guests, but the legends endure, sometimes even outlasting the estates themselves. Picture the nervous excitement of a visitor spotting a shadowy figure in the corner of their eye, only to glance back and see nothing but empty air. The fake ghosts blur into real myths, shaping the culture of haunted Britain. These stories become part of the heritage that still draws thrill seekers to ancient castles and manors. The past and present mingle in these eerie echoes. It's fascinating to think that what began as a social game turned into folklore that defines parts of Britain's mysterious charm today. You settle into the rhythm of the story as the fake ghosts evolve beyond mere entertainment to become tools of subtle psychological warfare. Imagine a noble household where appearances mean everything and a whispered ghost tale can shift alliances or unsettle rivals. These spectral performances were sometimes carefully timed to influence business deals or family politics. A ghost appearing at just the right moment could nudge a conversation, unsettle a foe, or create a distraction. Remember the sunscreen made from crocodile dung? Strange mixtures like that remind you how odd and inventive people have always been. The nobles' ghostly ruses were as much about power and control as about fun. Historians still argue about the extent to which these hauntings were used strategically versus being simply social amusements. But one thing is clear, their creators understood that fear is a potent tool. Imagine guests exchanging nervous glances as a ghostly figure drifts past the window or a sudden cold spot freezes a conversation mid-sentence. These moments weren't random, they were carefully orchestrated to maintain an aura of mystery and dominance. The ghosts served as reminders that beneath the veneer of civility, the aristocracy played a complex game of influence and image. The strange blend of spectacle and strategy shows how deeply intertwined entertainment and politics were in noble circles. These fake ghosts weren't just stories, they were instruments wielded with subtlety and skill. So as you listen now, remember that fear has always been a language understood by the powerful. You drift into a quieter corner of this ghostly history where the personal fears and superstitions of nobles reveal themselves. Imagine a private chamber lined with books and portraits where an aristocrat confides in a trusted friend about a haunting that feels too real to be fake. Even those orchestrating the ghostly tricks sometimes found themselves unsettled by their own creations. The line between performance and genuine belief blurred in strange and unexpected ways. Remember the sunscreen made from crocodile dung? Odd mixtures like that remind you how superstition and practicality often mingled in the past. Some nobles genuinely feared curses or spirits, and their fake ghosts sometimes took on a life of their own, feeding those anxieties. Historians still debate whether these fears were sincere or cleverly manipulated to maintain social order, but the fact remains that ghost stories were as much about managing emotions as they were about entertainment. Picture the nervous glance of a noble pausing before a mirror convinced it might reflect something otherworldly. The psychological grip of these hauntings went beyond the guests and seeped into the hosts' minds, too. It's a reminder that fear can be both a tool and a trap, and sometimes the hunters become the haunted. This strange mingling of control and vulnerability shows how complex the noble relationship with ghosts really was. So as to relax now, remember that even the most powerful can be touched by the eerie whispers of their own fears. You feel the story weaving deeper into the ways these fake ghosts influenced the art and culture of their time. Picture a grand drawing room where artists and writers gather, inspired by the eerie tales circulating through the noble circles. These spectral performances didn't just scare, they sparked creativity. Poets penned ghostly verses, painters captured shadowy figures on canvas, and musicians composed haunting melodies that echoed through candlelit halls. Remember the sunscreen made from crocodile dung? That odd detail hints at how inventive and experimental people were back then. The fake ghosts became muses for artists who blurred the boundaries between reality and imagination. Historians still debate whether this ghost-inspired art was a genuine expression of fascination or just fashionable themes riding on aristocratic trends, but the influence is undeniable. Imagine a painter carefully rendering a translucent figure hovering over a moonlit landscape, or a composer weaving eerie notes into a symphony. These creative works spread beyond noble estates, shaping the broader culture and feeding public fascination with the supernatural. The fake ghosts born in aristocratic play seeped into the popular imagination and helped define an entire genre of Gothic and Romantic art. It's strange to think that the echoes of these ghostly entertainments helped shape the art you might admire today. As you settle in, you become part of a long tradition of those captivated by shadows and mystery. You begin to sense how these ghostly entertainments intersected with early scientific curiosity and the rise of rational thought. Imagine a grand salon where nobles and scholars gather to debate the nature of these phantoms. Some believed these ghosts were merely clever tricks, while others insisted spirits might be real, lingering between worlds. This tension between superstition and reason shaped the way ghosts were both created and understood. Remember the sunscreen made from crocodile dung? A bizarre fact, but one that reflects how people experimented with both the mystical and the practical. Historians still argue about how much early scientists dismissed or engaged with ghost stories. Some even conducted ghost hunts armed with rudimentary instruments to detect unseen forces. This mix of skepticism and belief created fertile ground for ghostly hoaxes to flourish. Picture yourself at a candlelit table where the air is thick with incense, and whispered theories about spirits swirl alongside laughter at the latest ghostly prank. These debates weren't just intellectual, they influenced the design and purpose of the fake hauntings. Nobles wanted to balance fear and fun, science and superstition, creating experiences that fascinated as much as they frightened. The strange dance between belief and doubt shows how ghosts reflect deeper human questions about life and death. So as you listen now, remember that every fake ghost is also a shadow of our desire to understand the unknown. You drift deeper into the complex web where these ghostly performances sometimes take a darker turn. Imagine a moonlit night in a sprawling manor where a carefully staged ghost story turns into a chilling lesson in power and consequence. Some nobles used their fake ghosts not just to entertain or intimidate, but to enforce silence and obedience. A ghost could serve as a warning, a reminder that certain secrets were not to be spoken aloud. Remember the sunscreen made from crocodile dung? Strange as it sounds, the odd mixtures and rituals of the past often carried hidden meanings. Historians still debate the extent to which these ghost stories were used to uphold social hierarchies or to punish dissent within noble households. But the chilling fact remains, fear was a powerful tool, and ghosts were one way to wield it without raising swords. Imagine the unease of a servant who hears whispered warnings in the dead of night, convinced that the ghost is watching. These performances blurred the lines between myth and control, using psychological pressure to maintain order. In some cases, the fake ghosts were more effective than any written rule or spoken threat. This darker side of the ghostly tradition reminds you that even fun can mask deeper intentions. So as you listen now, feel the weight of those whispered warnings and the fragile balance of fear and authority in noble life. You find yourself walking through the dim corridors of history where the fake ghosts begin to intersect with real tragedies. Imagine a noble estate shadowed by loss, where the ghostly figures take on a more somber tone. Sometimes the stories started as elaborate pranks, but grew out of genuine grief and remembrance. These phantoms became memorials, echoes of lives once lived and loved, haunting not just the halls but the hearts of those left behind. Remember the sunscreen made from crocodile dung? Odd facts like that remind you how strange human customs can be, mixing the bizarre with the deeply emotional.
Historians still debate whether the nobility's ghosts were purely theatrical or if they sometimes reflected sincere attempts to connect with the past. The truth is often tangled between performance and genuine mourning.
Picture yourself in a quiet chamber where a ghostly figure lingers near a portrait, a silent tribute to someone gone. These hauntings weren't just entertainment, they were part of the complex human process of coping with loss and preserving memory. The fake ghosts carried stories that touched on love, regret, and the passage of time. It's strange to realize that these aristocratic ghost stories echo universal emotions that still resonate today. As you listen, you become part of that timeless reflection on life, death, and remembrance. You feel the story slow as it drifts into the quieter moments when the fake ghosts became part of everyday life for the nobility. Imagine a morning in a grand estate where the servants whisper about last night's ghostly encounter as they prepare breakfast. Spectral tales weren't just for grand parties, they became woven into daily routines, a common thread connecting generations. Ghost stories were told around fireplaces, passed down like family recipes, growing richer with each retelling. Remember the sunscreen made from crocodile dung? It's an odd detail, but shows how life's oddities linger in memory, just like ghost stories. Historians still argue how much these tales were believed by different classes within the household. For the nobles, they were a form of amusement or warning. For servants, they could be genuine sources of fear or superstition. This blending of perspectives created a unique culture around these fake hauntings. Picture the quiet smile of a housekeeper recalling the ghost that startled her decades ago, a story now softened by time. These tales helped shape the identity of estates and families, tying the past and present in a shared mystery. The fake ghosts became a comforting, if eerie, part of life. You glide further into the winding story where the fake ghosts inspire an unexpected form of rebellion. Imagine a gathering where servants and nobles alike use the ghost stories as a subtle way to challenge the rigid social order. These spectral tales became a playground for coded messages and secret jokes, a way to poke fun at authority while keeping everyone guessing. The ghosts served as masks behind which the oppressed could express fears, hopes, and frustrations without overt confrontation. Remember the sunscreen made from crocodile dung? Just like that odd concoction, these ghostly tales mixed humor and rebellion in surprising ways. Historians still debate how openly servants could participate in these ghostly games and whether nobles ever realized they were being gently mocked. But the subtle power of these stories to bridge social divides is undeniable. Picture the quiet laughter behind a ghostly veil, the unspoken camaraderie forged in shared secrets. The fake ghosts became a language spoken in shadows, a rare moment when class boundaries softened and humor united the household. This hidden layer of meaning reveals how even fear can be transformed into a tool of resilience. So as you listen now, sense the playful spirit behind the eerie stories, a reminder that even in the darkest tales, light can flicker through. You feel the narrative winding toward a broader horizon where the influence of fake ghosts spills beyond Britain's shores. Imagine noble travelers carrying these ghostly tales across Europe and even to the colonies, weaving them into new cultures and settings. The ghost performances become a form of cultural export, blending local legends with aristocratic flair, creating new myths in distant lands. These spectral stories adapt, reflecting different fears and hopes while keeping the core thrill alive. Remember the sunscreen made from crocodile dung? It's a strange reminder of how customs evolve and travel in unexpected ways. Historians still argue about how much British ghost traditions influenced other cultures versus being reshaped by them. But the interplay between Old World and New World stories shows how ghosts are universal carriers of mystery and wonder. Picture yourself in a colonial mansion where a ghost story takes on new meaning, blending native beliefs with aristocratic drama. These cross-cultural hauntings enrich the global tapestry of supernatural lore and highlight how stories transform as they travel. The fake ghosts born in British estates find new life in places far from their origin. As you settle into this thought, you become part of the worldwide conversation between past and present, myth and reality. You feel the story turning inward, focusing on the fading of the fake ghosts as the world modernizes. Imagine grand estates falling silent as electric lights replace flickering candles and scientific explanations dissolve mysterious shadows. The carefully crafted hauntings lose their power as new technologies and changing beliefs sweep through society. Ghosts become less about spectacle and more about nostalgia, reminders of a past world slipping away. Remember the sunscreen made from crocodile dung? That odd fact echoes the strange and fleeting nature of old customs. Historians still debate whether the decline of fake ghosts was due more to scientific progress or shifting social structures. But the disappearance of these spectral performances marks the end of an era where fear and imagination held sway over reality. Picture yourself walking through an empty manor, echoes of laughter and ghostly whispers fading into silence. Fake ghosts become memories, stories told to children and visitors, softening into legend. They remind us how imagination once shaped our experience of the world and how those shadows linger in unexpected ways. As you listen now, feel the gentle passing of time and the bittersweet beauty of things once vivid, now quietly fading into the night. You drift into the quiet conclusion of this long journey through shadows and stories. Imagine the soft glow of twilight settling over a grand estate where memories of fake ghosts linger like a gentle breeze through empty halls. These spirits, born of cleverness and whimsy, fear and control, now rest in the shared history of a world that once loved to blur the lines between the seen and unseen. Remember the sunscreen made from crocodile dung? That strange little fact is a reminder that history is full of surprises, odd, humorous, and deeply human. As the centuries pass, the fake ghosts become more than tricks. They become symbols of imagination's power to shape reality. Historians still argue about many details, but everyone agrees on the enduring fascination with ghosts, whether real, fake, or somewhere in between. Picture yourself slowly closing the door on these stories, feeling the quiet peace that comes from knowing these ghosts are part of a much larger tale. Their whispers fade softly but never disappear entirely, lingering in the imagination and the gentle hush of night. Now, as you settle into sleep, allow the shadows to soften, the past to blur, and the comforting silence to envelop you. Let your breath slow and your mind drift free, floating on the gentle waves of history's quiet mystery. Sleep well and dream lightly of whispered halls and friendly ghosts. You drift into a deeper part of the story where things grow more curious than chilling. It's the 19th century now, and something new is stirring in the drawing rooms and parlors of the well-to-do, not just in Britain, but across the Western world. Spiritualism has arrived. Tables are rapping, curtains are rustling without wind. and people are whispering to the dead through mysterious mediums who charge by the session. You find yourself seated in a velvet-draped room where a dozen guests clutch each other's hands in a circle, trying not to giggle. A candle flickers. A breeze that shouldn't be there glides across your cheek. Someone gasps. The medium begins to moan. Suddenly, the table jumps. And you can't help but remember those noble parties from a century before. Same sense of theater, same craving for a ghost to make things exciting. Remember the crocodile dung sunscreen? Well, here's a fun parallel. Victorians also tried spirit photography with double exposures and gauze-wrapped ghosts to capture fake images of their dead relatives. And yet they absolutely wanted to believe it. Historians still argue whether spiritualism was a reaction to loss, science fatigue, or just fashionable nonsense. But it brought fake ghosts into a brand new spotlight. Some aristocrats embraced it. Others rolled their eyes and whispered that their great-grandfather's ghost parties had more class. The seance, once a private pastime for grief-stricken families, became something else entirely, a form of social entertainment, like a spooky dinner theater with invisible actors. And the mediums? Oh, they knew the tricks. Fishing line, hidden bells, collapsible furniture, all the same stagecraft once used by noble pranksters in candlelit ballrooms. The difference was that now, instead of admitting it was fake, they claimed it was real. The fake ghosts had gone professional. There's something oddly modern about it. You can imagine someone live streaming a seance today, racking up views with every ghostly knock. These 19th century spiritualists were ahead of the game, blending fear, drama, and mystery into something marketable. They sold hope, closure, and chills for the price of admission. Picture yourself watching one of these seances unfold, the scent of rose water in the air, the creak of the floorboards beneath your chair. You half believe the spirit of Lord Grantham might actually be here, tugging on your coat. Then the medium announces he's proud of your recent business decision, and you're like, hang on, how would he know about your socks and sandals startup? The line between performance and belief blurred. For every skeptic like Harry Houdini who famously tried to debunk the fakes, there were hundreds more who just wanted one more message from the beyond. And spiritualism gave them a familiar structure, one the nobles had perfected generations before. The darkness, the props, the reactions. It was theater of the soul. Even the clothing matched. Victorians wore black veils and mourning jewelry that felt like costumes for ghost plays. Some women even fashioned their entire identity around grief, becoming walking testaments to the dead like living ghosts themselves. There's something hauntingly poetic about that, isn't there? And yet, you don't feel afraid. You feel intrigued, amused, comforted even. Because in a world that was moving faster than ever with railways, telegraphs, and factories changing everything, the idea that something eternal, even a fake ghost, could still visit you in your parlor brought a little magic back to life. You lean back, imagining candlelight dancing across marble mantels and velvet skirts. The voices from beyond grow quieter, replaced by a ticking clock and the slow hush of sleep settling in your chest. You ease into the heavy velvet gloom of a Victorian drawing room, where everything smells faintly of lavender and dust. The furniture is dark, the windows are draped, and somewhere off to the side a grandfather clock ticks solemnly as if keeping time for the ghosts. This is the age when grief becomes a fashion statement and the supernatural becomes the most popular houseguest no one invited, or maybe everyone did. You sit beside a prim woman in full mourning dress. Her husband died 3 years ago, but she still wears black lace, carries a locket of his hair, and politely informs you that he sometimes visits through the wallpaper. You nod slowly, not wanting to be rude. This is Victorian England, and they are absolutely obsessed with ghosts. And it isn't just for fun. Mourning is serious business. Queen Victoria herself set the tone by publicly grieving Prince Albert for decades. Everyone followed her lead. Homes displayed post-mortem portraits. Mourning etiquette books told you how long to wear black and how to entertain guests while still being dramatically sorrowful. And ghosts, well, they were just an extension of that grief. It became normal to assume your dead relatives were still hanging around. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen? Here's today's strange parallel. Victorian mourning brooches often contained actual pieces of the deceased, a curl of hair pressed behind glass, framed in gold, worn like a tiny, wearable shrine. And yes, if you could turn hair into jewelry, imagining your great-uncle tapping on the mirror didn't seem too strange. Historians still argue whether the Victorian ghost obsession was rooted more in genuine belief or in the theatrical thrill of sadness. Some say it was about finding control during a time of rapid industrial change. Others think it was just another way to process enormous personal and national grief. Whatever the cause, it made ghosts fashionable again. And unlike the cheeky noble pranks of the past, these ghosts were often tragic. They wept in corners. They glided through nurseries and over family portraits. People didn't laugh at them. They invited them to tea. They weren't always fake anymore, but the lines stayed deliciously blurry. Imagine being invited to a morning party where the lighting is dim, the punch is heavy with nutmeg, and the conversation includes phrases like, "I believe she still brushes the children's hair at night." The mood isn't fearful, it's sentimental. Ghosts become companions, not threats, and many aristocrats hosted such gatherings to show their refinement and depth of feeling. But the funny thing is, many of the old ghost trick props were still in use. Some estate owners who hadn't moved on from their ancestors' theatrical past just shifted the mood. The trapdoors, the hidden mirrors, the whispered voices behind curtains, all still there, just a little sadder now. Picture a butler standing behind a wall, tugging on a string to move a portrait, but this time, it's not to make guests scream. It's to give them the comforting illusion that grandfather's spirit hasn't left. Still a performance, just rebranded. You pass through a room hung with black crepe and feel a draft on your shoulder. Is it just the window? Or something else? A voice beside you murmurs that it's the spirit of a lost child still playing with her wooden doll. You nod again. You're not entirely convinced, but you're also not entirely not convinced. It's that kind of night. Victorian novels explode with this atmosphere. Think gloomy mansions, creaking staircases, candlelit corridors. The Gothic tradition that noble ghost pranksters helped pioneer finds a new home in literature. Writers like Charles Dickens bring ghosts into popular fiction, blending spooky with social commentary. You smile at the thought, fake noble ghosts, once the life of the party, have now been domesticated, mourned, respected, fictionalized. No longer just pranksters in dusty robes, they've become symbols of memory, sadness, and the eternal hope that the people we love never really leave us. And even as you leave that velvet parlor behind, a part of you stays there curled up by the fire, watching shadows dance on the walls, wondering who might be quietly watching back. Now you find yourself strolling through the long moonlit corridors of a Victorian country manor, but this one isn't a home anymore. It's been turned into something entirely new. Welcome to the age of the haunted tourist attraction. Yes, believe it or not, there was a moment in the late 19th century when nobles who no longer had the means to maintain their sprawling estates decided to cash in on their family ghosts. The fake spirits once used to entertain aristocratic guests were now being pitched to the curious public, for a small fee, of course. You walk through creaky hallways lit with flickering gas lamps. A velvet rope blocks off one end of a stairwell. Danger, active hauntings, the sign warns, though the scuff marks on the wall suggest it's just where the groundskeeper stores the mop bucket. Still, the mood is perfect. A chill in the air, a whisper you didn't quite catch, and somewhere a bell rings faintly even though no one is nearby. This is the age of ghost tours. Once private, noble traditions are rebranded into spooky entertainment for the middle class. People want to be scared, but only a little. They want a thrill, but they want it safe, preferably guided, narrated, and offered with a complimentary scone afterward. The families who once hired costume servants to jump out from behind curtains now train those same servants to become ghost docents. They don dusty cloaks, carry lanterns, and lead groups of wide-eyed visitors through supposedly cursed halls, reciting tales of betrayal, revenge, and spectral romance. And the best part? Many of the stories are entirely made up. Remember the secret tunnel behind the wine cellar? It's now said to be the route taken by a jilted bride who wanders the estate sobbing into her veil. Never mind that it was actually used to discreetly refill the brandy without alarming guests. Here's your strange detail for the night. One estate reportedly hired a man to dress as a headless monk and ride a donkey across the back lawn during full moons. Why a donkey? No one knows. But it worked. Crowds grew. Ticket sales soared. And the fake ghosts, now part of an official business model, were more popular than ever. Historians still argue about how many of these hauntings were completely invented versus slightly exaggerated. Some believe the nobility simply tapped into local folklore and enhanced it with a little dry ice and a well-timed scream. Others suggest that economic desperation pushed aristocrats to invent entire haunted histories just to stay afloat. You imagine one of these tour guides practicing their lines in the mirror. And here, dear visitors, is the grand staircase where Lady Evelyn's ghost was last seen rearranging the flower vases. Meanwhile, a teenager in the next room has the job of rattling chains at just the right moment. What once was exclusive is now democratized. Ordinary families pile into these estates in search of something mysterious, spooky, and oddly comforting. In a time when life is growing more mechanical and predictable, haunted houses offer a flicker of the unpredictable. A brush with the uncanny, scripted, but still fun. And you? You're kind of loving it. It's not just the ghosts, it's the layers. The way one generation's prank becomes another's ghost story, then a third generation's marketing tool. Every floorboard creak feels like part of a larger, centuries-old performance. The curtain flutters slightly. Was that a breeze? Or a rope? Or maybe just your imagination trained to see what it's supposed to see? You smile, stepping out into the night air. The tour is over. The manor glows behind you. And even though you know most of it was staged, the headless monk, the weeping bride, the mysterious cold spots, something about it still lingers in the air, like the scent of old roses and candle wax. The fake ghosts, it seems, are alive and well. You step into a chilly London fog, the gaslights casting halos in the mist as you follow the echo of footsteps down a narrow alley. Tonight, the ghosts aren't in country manors or creaking attics. They've come to the city, and they're part of the show. Welcome to the world of Victorian stagecraft, where fake ghosts get their most dramatic upgrade yet. Theaters, magic halls, and parlors become playgrounds for illusionists, scientists, and spiritualists alike. And at the center of this phantom frenzy, a little invention called the Pepper's Ghost Illusion. Now, don't let the name fool you. No one named Pepper ever haunted a hallway. The trick, invented in the 1860s, used angled glass and carefully lit reflections to create the image of a translucent figure that seemed to float on stage. The audience would gasp. Ladies would clutch their pearls. And no one quite believed it was fake, even though it was pure stagecraft. You watch as a performer draws the curtain. A skeleton suddenly rises behind a glass sheet. Gasps filled the room. It's a simple reflection, but it works. This illusion becomes a staple of haunted houses, magic shows, even early cinema. In fact, the same technique is still used in theme parks today. But here's the twist. This new form of ghost isn't just for noble entertainment or clever tourism. It becomes a tool in something far more complex, the rise of spiritualism. Spiritualism, for the uninitiated, is the belief that the living can communicate with the dead, often through mediums who claim to receive messages from the other side. And during the late 1800s, it spreads like wildfire across Britain, America, and beyond. Mediums hold seances in drawing rooms. Tables shake, candles flicker, mysterious writing appears on chalkboards. People swear they hear voices, feel touches, see ectoplasm oozing from curtains. Some believe, others are skeptical. And somewhere in the middle are a handful of nobles and, yes, former prank-loving aristocrats who recognize an opportunity. You're sitting cross-legged on a thick carpet. A heavy curtain flutters in the candlelight. The medium moans softly. And then a bell rings, a hand touches your shoulder, and a ghostly shape emerges from the shadows. Your heart jumps. But wait, isn't that Jenkins the butler? Exactly. That's the thing. Many seances were staged using simple parlor tricks borrowed from the very same ghost hoaxes nobles had been pulling off for centuries. Hidden compartments, wires, false walls, and, yes, Pepper's ghost. What used to be entertainment becomes something deeper, more emotional. The fake ghosts haven't gone away, they've just changed costumes. Tonight's strange detail, one infamous Victorian medium claimed to channel a 300-year-old spirit who only spoke in 18th century slang and once interrupted a seance to ask if anyone had seen his missing shoes. Scholarly debate still lingers over whether this was accidental comedy or deliberate showmanship. Historians still argue whether spiritualism was mostly harmless hope or a dangerous scam. Some see it as a comfort to grieving families during a time when medicine couldn't explain sudden death. Others condemn it as pure exploitation. And woven through all of it is the thread of noble influence, the tradition of ghost performance shaping a new kind of belief. You shuffle along to another seance, this one in a glittering West End parlor where the wine flows as freely as the ghost stories. Nobles rub elbows with actors, scientists, and mystics. Everyone wants to see a spirit. No one wants to admit they've been fooled. And as you watch a floating tambourine play itself in midair, you can't help but smile. It's the same trick Lord Wycliffe used back in Part 5 with a string, a pulley, and a very enthusiastic housemaid, only now it's wrapped in candle smoke and sold as genuine proof of the afterlife. Ghosts, it seems, are eternal, not because they exist necessarily, but because people want them to. You step back into the fog, the curtain falling behind you, another illusion ends. Another audience applauds, and in the shadows, the echoes of centuries of fake spirits swirl together in a whisper, "Was that real?" You'll never quite know. You find yourself in a quiet bookshop, somewhere between the smell of old paper and dust-covered wooden shelves. It's late. The streets outside are silent, and tucked in a forgotten corner is a strange little volume, cracked leather cover, faded gold lettering. Your eyes settle on the title, A Compendium of Haunted Estates of the British Isles. Turns out there's an entire publishing craze dedicated to ghostly encounters. Some real, some absolutely made up, and many based on the staged hauntings we've already crept through together. In the early 20th century, Britain's obsession with ghosts wasn't fading. It was exploding into books, pamphlets, magazines, and eventually radio dramas. Paranormal tales moved from private parties and dark hallways to mass media, where anyone with a few pence could buy a story about a haunted abbey, a howling banshee, or a noblewoman who walks through walls. Guessed it, many of these stories had roots in those fake ghost traditions. Nobles who once paid their servants to frighten guests now found their tales repurposed by eager journalists or amateur ghost hunters looking for material. You flip through the pages. There's Lord Ashcombe's garden ghost, actually a gardener in a sheet. Lady Fairweather's floating harp, really a phonograph on a timer. And the infamous Grey Nun of Hartley Manor, who was played for years by the cook's sister to impress suitors. The stories are being collected, curated, and sometimes wildly exaggerated. Wildly exaggerated. It doesn't matter anymore if they're true. People want to believe, or at least they want to be entertained. A good ghost story, after all, sells faster than a history lecture. And then there's radio, the newest ghost stage of them all. In the 1920s and 30s, British households gather around the warm hum of a wireless set to hear tales of haunted moors and possessed paintings. Suddenly, ghosts have voices. Static becomes suspense. Whispers come alive. Imagine the thrill of hearing for the first time the disembodied moan of the ghost in the tower through a crackling speaker, all while huddled under a blanket with a cup of tea. It's spine-tingling and entirely manufactured by a sound effects technician in a BBC studio, tapping coconuts and rustling parchment. Here's your strange detail for tonight. One popular ghost radio show hired an actor to groan, so convincingly listeners flooded local police stations thinking someone was trapped in their attic. The actor later claimed his inspiration came from indigestion and his mother-in-law. As for scholarly debate, historians still argue about the impact of these ghost stories on national identity. Some say they helped Britain preserve its crumbling heritage by keeping old castles and legends alive in the public imagination. Others believe it blurred the line between entertainment and historical fact, muddying the truth in a sea of spectral gossip. You stroll farther into the bookshop. A cat watches you from the top of a dictionary pile. The old man behind the counter snores softly, head resting on a volume titled Ghosts of Surrey, a regional review. And you start to realize that something has changed. The ghosts you followed, from aristocratic pranks to full-blown hauntings, have made a complete journey. They began as jokes, evolved into noble party tricks, transformed into tourism, spiritualism, and now live in mass culture. They no longer need candlelit corridors or foggy hedgerows. They live in pages, on airwaves, in imagination. And they're still with us. Because no matter how rational you are, no matter how many times you've seen the hidden mirror or the pulley system, part of you still listens for the creak on the stairs, still wonders about the cold spot by the fireplace, still checks the hallway just in case. Ghosts, real or not, have earned their place in British history, and they didn't even need to die to do it. You tuck the book under your arm, smile at the cat, and step out into the cool night. Somewhere in the distance, Big Ben chimes. And behind you, a window in the bookshop fogs for a moment, like someone breathed on the inside. Or maybe it was just the draft. You stroll through a modern-day country estate that now operates as a quaint bed and breakfast. It has lace curtains, weak Wi-Fi, and a suspiciously creaky third stair. The kind of place where the scrambled eggs come with a ghost story. And that's precisely the point. Because here's where the centuries-old tradition of fake ghosts finds its most ironic legacy: tourism. You're not the only one who's ever paid to sleep in a haunted room. Entire businesses thrives in the idea that somewhere between your full English breakfast and the nightly turn-down service, you might spot a shadowy figure at the foot of your bed. The new generation of British hauntings isn't about pranking guests anymore. It's about attracting them. At breakfast, your cheerful host, a woman named Gwen, who owns 4 cats and one allegedly cursed wardrobe, casually mentions that room 6 is where Lady Eleanor once drifted through the wall and ruined someone's honeymoon. You nod politely while chewing toast, unsure whether to laugh or check under the bed later. The truth? These stories often trace back to earlier fabrications. Someone's uncle once dressed as a ghost to avoid doing dishes. Someone else exaggerated a creaky pipe. And slowly, these tales took on lives of their own. Now, they're on the welcome brochures. One famous hotel in Derbyshire proudly advertises its haunted wine cellar, complete with flickering lights and the scent of phantom cigars. According to the plaque, it's the ghost of a nobleman who drowned in a barrel of brandy. Sounds tragic. More likely, he slipped on the stairs in 1892 while trying to impress a barmaid. The British tourism industry understands something the old nobles figured out ages ago. People want to be spooked, especially in places that smell of damp stone and history. They want their selfies in front of ghostly portraits and their evening tea with a side of spectral lore. Tonight's strange detail: one haunted castle in Wales reportedly makes more money from Halloween sleepovers than it does from the rest of the tourist season combined. They even have a waiting list for guests who want to accidentally witness the White Lady dropping her handkerchief from the tower. Spoiler, it's a teenager with a laundry basket. And as always, a scholarly debate lingers in the mist. Is this good history or bad? Preservationists argue that ghost stories, real or not, keep old buildings alive. They bring in funds, volunteers, and interest. But others say it's historical distortion, a sideshow that overshadows real events with candlelit melodrama. You check into your room. The wallpaper peels slightly at the edges. There's an antique mirror that probably saw more makeup mishaps than paranormal activity. Still, there's a laminated note on the nightstand. Should you experience any unusual sensations during your stay, please inform the front desk immediately. We provide complimentary sage bundles upon request. Because whether it's a fake ghost in a powdered wig or a motion-activated speaker behind the wardrobe, the lineage is clear. These tales are descendants of noble pranks, refined, repackaged, and now rebranded as premium experiences. You lie down, watching the ceiling fan spin slowly above. Somewhere outside, a sensor light flickers. The hallway creaks. Gwen's cats knock something over downstairs. But your brain, trained by centuries of stories, wonders, was that Lady Eleanor? Probably not, but maybe. The train rumbles through the English countryside, passing green fields, mossy stone walls, and the occasional sheep that looks like it knows something you don't. You're heading to yet another stop on your sleepy, spooky tour, a small village with a big reputation for ghosts. Not just any ghosts, though. These are the ones that have gone viral. Because now we're entering the modern age where fake ghosts have made the leap from candlelit corridors to YouTube thumbnails and TikTok filters. You step off the train with your bag and a bottle of water, only to be greeted by a sign that reads, "Welcome to Windmere Hollow, home of the Screaming Postman." No yoke. There's a full walking tour dedicated to the legend, complete with local teenagers in spooky costumes who jump out from behind mailboxes for tips. The village capitalizes on it all. Shops sell ghost-shaped scones. The pub has a menu item called Banshee Pie, which is really just shepherd's pie with extra cheese. And every October, Windmere Hollow holds a festival where people wear sheets, play eerie organ music from Bluetooth speakers, and reenact ghost sightings that were probably just Mr. Bennett locking himself out of his house again. But here's what makes it fascinating. Some of these modern hauntings are totally made up, not even based on real stories from the past. They're deliberate inventions born on the internet, given local flavor, and embraced by the community. One viral video of a door slamming in the night gets 2 million views, and suddenly the house becomes a landmark. The owners have no idea how it started. But now they sell t-shirts. It's a curious full circle. Remember the nobles in the 1700s who invented hauntings to elevate their estates? The pranksters who created ghosts out of boredom and dramatic flair? They were the proto-influencers of paranormal branding. They just didn't have Wi-Fi. Strange detail of the night, A TikToker named Hazel Glow claimed to be possessed for 5 full hours during a live stream at a haunted barn. Turns out her ring light fell and hit her on the head. She made $4,000 in donations before logging off to eat chips. And here comes the scholarly debate, fresh from the crypt. Folklorists argue that these new digital ghosts are just as valid as traditional legends. They reflect cultural anxieties, our fears of surveillance, digital death, or the uncanny valley of AI-generated faces. Others say it's all nonsense, marketing dressed up in Halloween costumes, and about as historically accurate as a ghost wearing Yeezys. You stroll through the village square. There's a pop-up booth where kids are being certified as junior ghost hunters. Their tools? Plastic EMF readers and overpriced ecto glow bracelets. You quietly hope they're having the time of their lives. The line between fiction and tradition is blurrier than ever. Ghosts now live in the cloud. They glitch through security cameras, appear in pixelated shadows, and manifest in shaky, overexposed footage with mysterious captions like, "What is that?" But deep down, it's still the same urge to play, to scare, to believe, to add a bit of delicious mystery to the everyday. And that's what makes it all strangely comforting. You head to your rental for the night, an old coach house with a door that won't quite close. The owner texts you the Wi-Fi code, W1 Indemir Ghosts, and wishes you a peaceful evening. You settle in, open your phone, and scroll through dozens of new ghost content creators. One of them is filming live just down the road. You look out the window. Just fog. Or maybe not. You wake up to the soft drumming of rain on old roof tiles. It's early morning, still dusky, with mist curling outside your window like steam from a forgotten kettle. You pull the covers up and wonder how it is that people used to sleep in places like this, with no Wi-Fi, no podcasts, and the occasional costumed relative pretending to be the ghost of Sir Walter Raleigh. But that's the past, and this part of your journey is going to the archives, literally. Today you're heading to a massive, drafty archive housed inside a repurposed chapel. The kind of place where every step echoes and the books smell like history and old sandwiches. You are here to dig deeper into how fake ghosts, once entertainment for nobles and fuel for social legends, were slowly absorbed into the official record. Because, believe it or not, some fake hauntings were so widely believed that they made it into newspapers, pamphlets, and legal records. Not just whispered at dinner, actually printed, cataloged, and filed in dusty drawers by men in waistcoats who probably rolled their eyes halfway through. You pull open a drawer labeled Unusual Incidents 1700-1899 and find a gem, an account of a woman in Wiltshire who sued her neighbor for sending forth a phantom on 3 occasions. It was eventually dismissed when the phantom was identified as the neighbor's drunk uncle in a borrowed sheet. Apparently, he just really liked night walks. But here's where it gets weird. The court documents didn't laugh it off. They treated it as real, which means future generations looking back without context might think England was literally haunted. That's how myths get legs. Or in this case, floating torsos. Strange detail of the day? An 1804 police record describes an arrest at Highgate Cemetery where a man was charged with deliberate spectral impersonation. His crime? Hiding behind tombstones, dressed in rags, and shouting, "Repent!" at people visiting loved ones. He was fined 1 guinea and told to go home and read a novel. Historians still argue about the role of ghost stories in British legal culture. Some say courts entertained these claims as a reflection of public belief, the law meeting people where they were. Others insist it was social theater, a way of mocking eccentricity without confronting deeper social tensions. After all, calling your neighbor a witch was dicey in 1800. But accusing them of summoning a spectral goose? Now that was safe and oddly specific, and it wasn't just legal records. Newspapers of the 18th and 19th centuries ran sensational ghost stories as entertainment. You find an 1812 column titled The Night Visitor of Norfolk with an illustration of a translucent figure hovering over a man holding a candle and looking dramatically startled. The article ends with the line, "Experts disagree on whether the ghost was real or merely Mr. Sims in his nightshirt again. These tales sold papers, just like they sell clicks today." As you flip through another brittle folio, you see how the ghosts of old became trapped in the amber of official record. It's strangely comforting. These stories, prank or not, mattered enough to be written down. Not as evidence of the supernatural, but as echoes of a culture that loved its mysteries and mischief. It makes you think, what stories are we accidentally recording for future historians? The TikTok ghost? The smart home that turns on lights by itself? Your Roomba spinning in circles at 3 a.m. might be filed under possessed apparatus domestic. The rain outside slows. You step out of the archive, the scent of paper still clinging to your sweater, revealing a sleepy high street where a sandwich board promises world-famous haunted tour at dusk. Because somewhere between dusty court records and novelty ghost tours, a story has been passed on, reshaped and retold, but still flickering like a candle in an old window. You begin to walk. The next tale is just around the corner. You head north again, toward the moors this time, wide, misty stretches of land where the wind howls like it remembers every prank and every whisper. Trees bent by time, and sheep who stare at you like they've seen some things and aren't about to explain. This part of your journey isn't about a specific ghost or even a specific noble. It's about something stranger, the long-term effect of fake hauntings on the British psyche. Because at some point, fake ghosts stopped being just spooky fun and started becoming folklore. Think about it. A noble fakes a haunting in 1760 to keep guests from snooping around a crumbling wine cellar. Word spreads, gets embellished, a servant adds that the ghost smells like burnt toast and speaks in Latin. Fast forward 200 years, and now you have a full-on legend, the Toast Ghost of Dunswell Manor, complete with artwork, podcasts, and a fan fiction subreddit. You sit at a cafe table on the edge of a windswept cliffside town, sipping tea that tastes like boiled moss, and reflect on how invented ghosts sometimes outlive real people by centuries. They become symbols, not of the past itself, but how we imagine the past should feel: mysterious, foggy, a little scary, and a little silly. One of the most famous examples? The Grey Lady of Greythorn Hall. The original sightings date back to the 1780s when Lady Ellington staged nightly visits from a woman in a powdered wig and long veil. Guests were terrified, or pretended to be. Over the years the story evolved. The Grey Lady had died of heartbreak or poison or an unusually aggressive sneeze. Now, Greythorn Hall sells candles and calendars in her image. No one remembers that she started as an inside joke. Strange detail? A 1920s cigarette card collection included her in a series called British Phantoms, right between the Headless Highwayman and a haunted goose named Cyril. And here's the scholarly debate. Folklorists can't agree on where legend ends and tradition begins. If enough people believe in a ghost that started as a prank, does it become real? Not in a spiritual sense, but in a cultural one? Some say yes. Belief makes it real in a social context. Others argue that authenticity matters, and a ghost born from deception shouldn't be granted the same status as organically developed folklore. You sip your tea and shrug. Seems like both might be right. The moors stretch out around you, quiet except for the distant bleating of a sheep with attitude. You can almost feel the stories lingering in the air, like mist, like memory. And you wonder how many of them began with a bored aristocrat, a candle, and a strong sense of the theatrical. You visit an old bookstore on the edge of the village. It smells of old pages and wood smoke. The owner hands you a faded volume, Spectral Traditions of the Northern Counties. Inside there's a chapter titled Ghosts Proven False Who Later Became True. It's a list. Short descriptions. Each one a prank turned into legend. Each one still believed by someone, somewhere. You flip the pages slowly. It's oddly comforting. These stories, born of drama, sometimes deception, found life beyond their creators. They became something more. A whisper behind a curtain, a creak on the stairs, a flicker at the edge of candlelight, and somewhere a storyteller smiling in the dark. You leave the moors behind and find yourself wandering into a quiet village nestled among rolling hills. The sun is dipping low, casting long shadows across cobblestone streets and ivy-covered cottages. It feels like the perfect setting for a ghost story, or maybe a dozen. You wander through the village square, noticing little signs of the past stitched into the present. Here, ghosts aren't just stories or pranks, they're part of the landscape, woven into the very identity of the place. It's a subtle kind of haunting where history lingers in the cracks of old walls and the creak of wooden doors. Created by nobles weren't just about scaring guests. They were about control, about mystery, about shaping the story of a place. You pause by an ancient oak, its bark rough and scarred like a veteran of countless seasons. Legend says a ghost once guarded this tree, but the truth is a bit more playful. According to village lore, a noble's fool used to sneak out at night dressed as a spirit to keep children from climbing the branches. The ghost scared off the kids so effectively that the tree survived centuries of rambunctious youth. Strange detail, every autumn the villagers still leave offerings of apples and small trinkets at the base of the oak. No one's quite sure why, but the tradition continues, a silent nod to the ghost that never really existed. Historians debate whether these invented hauntings were cynical manipulations or early forms of community storytelling. Some argue the nobles weaponized fear to maintain social hierarchies and privacy. Others believe these stories gave people a shared language of mystery and wonder, helping to bind communities through imagination. You smile, thinking about how even the most mischievous, fake ghost can become a cherished part of history. After all, stories aren't just about facts. They're about connection, about sparking curiosity, and sometimes about a little fun. As night falls, you find a quiet spot to sit and listen to the soft chorus of the village settling in. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks, sighs through the trees, and just for a moment, you imagine the ghostly fool peeking from behind the oak, still watching over the village in his own playful way. You breathe in the cool air and feel the gentle weight of stories carried on the breeze. They're not just tales of ghosts. They're stories of people, places, and the magic of imagination. And that, you realize, is the true legacy of the fake ghosts. Not fear, but wonder. You follow a narrow country lane that twists through fields dotted with wildflowers and ancient hedgerows. The late afternoon sun filters through the leaves, casting shifting patterns on the dirt path beneath your feet. The air smells faintly of damp earth and blooming foxglove, grounding you in the present as your mind drifts back to the many stories you've uncovered. You think about the nobles who once hired actors to haunt their homes, not just to scare guests, but to craft a particular image, a manor steeped in mystery, worthy of awe and respect. In a world without Instagram or viral videos, a well-placed ghost story was a powerful tool. It painted a family as ancient, powerful, and just a little bit dangerous. You come upon a crumbling gate leading into a neglected garden. This place once belonged to a minor noble who was famous for hosting midnight seances. The ghost stories he inspired were elaborate affairs with hidden trapdoors, cleverly rigged candles, and actors concealed in shadows. Guests who dared question the legitimacy often found themselves locked in a cold stone cell until dawn. Not very friendly, but undeniably effective. Strange detail, the garden still has a labyrinth of overgrown paths designed to confuse and disorient visitors. Local legend claims the ghost still wanders these twists, though it's probably just the gardener's cat. Historians debate whether these ghostly performances were acts of genuine belief or calculated social theater. Some suggest the nobles themselves began to believe their own fabrications, blurring the line between reality and fantasy. Others think it was all a game, a way to distract and control, especially in politically turbulent times. You press your hand to the rough stone of the garden wall, feeling the cool texture beneath your fingers. The weight of centuries presses down, a reminder that stories live on long after their creators. As the sun sinks below the horizon, you hear the distant toll of a church bell, slow and solemn. It marks the passing of another day and perhaps another ghost story added to the endless tapestry. You turn back toward the village, your footsteps soft on the leaf-strewn path, carrying with you the echoes of whispered legends and the playful shadows of ghosts who never truly existed, but never really left either. You follow a quiet, winding road bordered by ancient stone walls covered in moss and ivy. The sky above is a soft shade of lavender, promising a peaceful dusk. Your footsteps fall softly on the gravel, each step taking you deeper into the stories of British nobility and their elaborate ghostly entertainments. Today, you're thinking about the actors themselves, those who donned eerie costumes and spooky masks to become the fake ghosts. They weren't just hired help. In many cases, they were trusted members of the household, sometimes even family. Their performances could be terrifying, absurd, or just downright hilarious, depending on the noble's whims. You imagine one such actor, a clever servant named Thomas, who was famous for his booming, ghostly wails. His specialty was the weeping widow, a spectral figure who appeared in the great hall clutching a tattered handkerchief. Guests would jump and whisper, wondering if the ghost was mourning a lost love or just annoyed that dinner was late. Strange detail, Thomas was also known for slipping off his ghostly robes after the show to join a card game in the servants' quarters. Apparently, even ghosts need a break. Historians debate whether the presence of these actors was purely for amusement or a form of psychological control. Some argue the elaborate ghost performances reinforced social order by reminding guests of the noble's power and mysterious lineage. Others see it as early immersive theater, a creative outlet in a world with few distractions. You pass a small, weathered sign marking the entrance to the old servants' quarters, now just a pile of stones and wildflowers. It's easy to imagine Thomas and his colleagues rehearsing their eerie moans and ghostly appearances here, practicing the perfect blend of fear and farce. As the evening shadows lengthen, you pause to listen to the distant call of an owl, its hoot a natural soundtrack to the stories you carry with you. You realize that these actors, these fake ghosts, were more than just performers. They were keepers of secrets, weaving stories that blurred the lines between reality and fantasy. You take a deep breath, the cool night air filling your lungs, and feel a comforting sense of connection to the past. The ghosts may have been fakes, but the stories they created are very real, echoing through time like a whispered secret waiting to be discovered. You stroll through a quiet forest path where the trees arch overhead like cathedral ceilings. The air smells of pine and damp leaves, and the soft crunch of twigs underfoot punctuates the silence. This natural cathedral feels like the perfect place to reflect on how fake ghosts sometimes wandered beyond the grand halls of noble estates and into local folklore. You recall stories of servants dressing as ghosts and wandering the nearby woods to frighten travelers or protect secret meeting spots. One tale speaks of a white lady who supposedly haunted a particular glade, but in truth she was an elusive noblewoman who disguised herself to sneak out without being recognized. Over time, her disguise morphed into legend. Strange detail. Villagers claimed the White Lady's ghost had the uncanny ability to mimic bird calls, a skill she likely learned from hours spent in the woods. To this day, local bird watchers sometimes swear they hear unnatural songs. Historians debate whether these woodland hauntings served practical purposes, such as deterring trespassers or protecting private land, or if they evolved simply from playful mischief. Some scholars suggest these ghost stories functioned as early forms of security theater, using fear to keep curiosity at bay without violence. You pause beneath a sprawling oak, its gnarled branches silhouetted against the fading light. It's easy to imagine a flickering lantern held by a disguised figure weaving through the trees to maintain the illusion of a restless spirit. As twilight deepens, you hear the distant echo of a woodpecker tapping rhythmically, a reminder that nature keeps time even as human stories unfold. The forest holds its secrets well, but you feel privileged to glimpse the echoes of a past where ghosts were costumes, stories, and subtle warnings all wrapped into one. You inhale deeply, the cool air grounding you, and smile. In a way, these fake ghosts were early storytellers, crafting narratives that blurred the line between fear and fascination, reality and myth. You walk into a quiet village churchyard where the gravestones lean at odd angles, worn smooth by centuries of rain and wind. The scent of damp earth mingles with the faint aroma of wildflowers growing between the stones. Here, ghosts are never far from the imagination, but the ones you're thinking about are less about sorrow and more about spectacle. Nobles sometimes used churchyards for their ghostly performances, staging midnight dramas with flickering lanterns and hidden trapdoors beneath the pews. One infamous event involved a resurrection that left guests wide-eyed and clutching their cloaks. The spectacle was less about piety and more about showing off wealth and theatrical flair. Strange detail. In one tale, a supposed ghost turned out to be the parson's cat, dressed in a tiny sheet by a mischievous page. The feline's green eyes, glowing in the dark, reportedly terrified even the bravest guests. Historians debate whether these performances were intended to reinforce religious awe or to simply entertain the upper class. Some scholars believe that the line between sacred and profane was intentionally blurred to heighten the emotional impact of these staged hauntings. You step carefully among the stones, noting the inscriptions and imagining the layers of history beneath your feet. Memory, myth, and history intertwine, a fitting setting for ghosts born of both fear and fancy. As the evening deepens, a breeze rustles the leaves, carrying with it the echoes of laughter, whispers, and perhaps the soft patting of that elusive cat. You smile to yourself, knowing that in the end, these fake ghosts were as much about human creativity as they were about fright. You wander through the dim corridors of an ancient manor, the heavy scent of aged wood and burning wax lingering in the air. The flickering candlelight throws long shadows on the tapestries hanging on the walls, making the space feel alive with hidden stories. Here, in the heart of these grand estates, the fake ghosts once played their most dramatic roles. Imagine the preparations, servants rigging hidden pulleys to make chandeliers sway, careful timing to open secret doors, and whispered cues for eerie moans echoing through empty halls. The noble family was notorious for these ghostly theatrics, going so far as to use elaborate costumes made of translucent fabrics that shimmered in the candlelight, enhancing the illusion of a spirit drifting through the corridors. Strange detail. During one infamous gathering, a guest fainted from fright. only to be revived by a butler who was also the lead ghost. The story became a favorite among staff, who joked that the ghost had a knack for bringing people back to life. Back to life. Historians debate whether these haunted manor spectacles were sincere attempts to contact the supernatural or merely clever diversions to distract from political tensions within the family. Some argue that nobles used these events to demonstrate power, implying control over the spirit world as well as the living. You lean against a cold stone pillar, the weight of centuries pressing gently on your shoulders. The manor breathes stories, a living archive of performances designed to unsettle and entertain in equal measure. As you walk toward a heavy oak door, the sound of distant laughter mingles with the creaking floorboards. It's clear the ghosts of these tales aren't just figments of imagination, they're echoes of a past where reality and illusion danced hand in hand. You step outside into a cool night, the manor's silhouette outlined against a star-studded sky. The crisp air carries the faint scent of wood smoke and blooming night jasmine. Out here, away from the grand halls and flickering candles, you think about the guests who endured these ghostly encounters. What must it have been like to walk into a house where every shadow could hide a specter? Picture a visitor crossing the threshold for a lavish dinner party, only to be met with strange noises, a sudden chill, whispered voices, or the fleeting glimpse of a white figure disappearing down a corridor. The nobles orchestrated these moments carefully, mixing fear with fascination to keep guests guessing and perhaps a little off balance. Strange detail, some guests reported the ghost's wails caused headaches that lingered for days, which modern science might chalk up to the effects of dim lighting and old building acoustics or just nerves. Historians debate whether these ghostly encounters genuinely unsettled guests or if most people played along, enjoying the thrill of being scared in a safe environment. Some scholars argue that the elaborate hauntings were an early form of immersive theater designed to entertain through suspense and surprise. You imagine yourself in those days, caught between skepticism and belief, curiosity and caution. The mix of shadows and candlelight creates an atmosphere where anything seems possible, and the boundary between real and fake blurs beautifully. As you breathe in the cool night air, you feel a thrill from the stories carried on the wind. These fake ghosts, though products of clever tricks and costumes, have left a lasting impression, a reminder that sometimes the best stories are those that make us question what we think we know. You follow a gravel path, winding through a foggy garden, the mist curling around your ankles like curious spirits. The faint glow of lanterns hangs in the distance, casting an ethereal light on the dew-covered roses and boxwood hedges. It's here you consider how nobles used their gardens not only for beauty, but also as stages for their ghostly spectacles. Imagine a midnight stroll through these grounds, guests led by flickering torches while ghosts slipped silently through the shadows, their pale figures weaving between the trees. These performances added layers of mystery and excitement, turning a simple garden walk into a haunted adventure. Strange detail, some gardens had secret passageways and hidden rooms beneath them, cleverly concealed beneath flower beds or disguised as garden sheds perfect for sudden ghostly appearances. Historians debate whether these garden hauntings were meant to amuse or intimidate. Some believe they reinforced noble prestige by showcasing control over both land and legend. Others argue they were simply elaborate pranks designed to break the monotony of aristocratic life. You pause to breathe in the scent of wet earth and roses, the cool mist settling on your skin like a ghostly caress. The garden feels alive, with stories waiting to be uncovered, where nature and narrative entwine. As the lanterns flicker and the mist thickens, you realize these fake ghosts were as much about controlling space as controlling minds, shaping experiences that linger long after the lights dim and the last laugh fades. You stand at the edge of a vast ballroom, the polished wooden floor gleaming faintly under the glow of crystal chandeliers. The walls are draped with heavy velvet curtains and adorned with portraits whose eyes seem to follow your every move. This was the stage for some of the most extravagant ghostly performances. Picture a grand masquerade ball where the line between guest and ghost blurred. Costumed nobles and actors alike moved through the crowd, their ghostly personas crafted with delicate masks, flowing fabrics, and carefully choreographed movements. At the stroke of midnight, a ghost would suddenly appear, gliding silently across the room, sending shivers down the spines of the revelers. Strange detail. One noblewoman famously insisted her ghost costume include real feathers from an exotic bird, believing they added an otherworldly weightlessness to her apparition. Historians debate whether these ghostly masquerades were sincere attempts to invoke spirits or simply a form of high entertainment. Some suggest they were ways for nobles to flirt with danger and mystery in a controlled setting, while others see them as a reflection of growing interest in the supernatural during that era. You imagine the buzz of whispered conversations, the nervous glances toward shadowy corners, and the thrill of being part of a secret only a few understood. The ghosts were not just performers. They were part of an elaborate dance between reality and illusion, fear and fascination. As the music swells and fades into the night, you realize that these ghostly ballets were not just about scaring guests, but about creating unforgettable moments, stories that would be told long after the candles burned out. You wander down a narrow stone hallway lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, their painted eyes following your every step. The faint scent of aged leather and dust fills the air, mixing with the faintest trace of lavender from dried herbs tucked into the cracks of the walls. In this corridor, the legacy of fake ghosts feels tangible, a blend of family pride and theatrical traditions. Seriously, commissioning painters to create portraits that could be lit just so, casting eerie shadows that seem to animate the painted figures. These visual tricks were part of the haunted atmosphere designed to unsettle guests while reminding them of the family's long and mysterious lineage. Strange detail, one estate featured a hidden room behind a rotating bookcase used exclusively by the ghost to slip in and out unseen, adding to the illusion that spirits moved freely through the house. Historians debate whether these haunting techniques were more about family reputation or genuine belief in the supernatural. Some scholars suggest nobles used these ghost stories to enforce social hierarchy, reminding guests that they were entering a realm where history and myth merged. You run your hand along the cool stone wall, feeling the texture and weight of centuries. The line between fact and fiction blurs here, as stories and shadows weave together in an intricate dance. As you continue down the hallway, you hear the soft creak of a door and the faintest whisper on the air, reminding you that in these ancient houses, ghosts, real or fake, are never far away. You step into a dimly lit library where towering shelves are packed with dusty leather-bound books. The faint smell of old paper and wood polish mingles with the subtle hint of pipe smoke lingering in the air. This sanctuary of knowledge was another perfect setting for the fake ghost performances where stories and secrets hung heavy like the velvet curtains. Imagine guests invited for an evening of reading and conversation suddenly interrupted by flickering candlelight and a mysterious figure gliding silently between the stacks. The ghost would appear from behind the shelves, draped in pale fabrics, delivering cryptic messages or simply evoking a chilling presence that kept everyone on edge. Strange detail. Some libraries had secret panels that opened with the pull of a book, allowing the ghost to move unseen. One noble even kept a collection of old theatrical masks used for these spectral roles. Historians debate whether these ghostly intrusions in libraries were meant to inspire awe or simply entertain. Some argue they reflected a growing fascination with the unknown and the supernatural during the Enlightenment, while others see them as clever distractions during long, dull social gatherings. You brush your fingers over the spine of an ancient tome, imagining the whispered secrets contained within. The library is a place where knowledge and mystery intertwine, where the line between reality and illusion is as thin as a page. As you leave the room, the faint echo of footsteps lingers, a reminder that these fake ghosts left more than fear behind. They created moments that sparked imagination and curiosity long after the last candle flickered out.